local news that matters on Local 22 News.
At This Place in History, we're in Burlington looking out on Lake Champlain with Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins. Steve, where are we and why?
So we're in Lakeview Cemetery, but really we're going to talk about this outsized presence that our landlocked state of Vermont had on the United States Navy. So we're going to talk about Admiral Henry Thomas Mayo, who was born right here in Burlington, and of course comes from a long line of famous Vermonters who are naval admirals. I mean, we talk about Dewey, we've talked about him before, this admiral of the Navy. So Mayo came a little bit after Dewey, but like I said, he was from Burlington. He went to the Naval Academy and worked his way up through the ranks until he was the commander-in-chief of North Atlantic American Naval Forces during World War I. So another really kind of cool connection, other than being a native son of Vermont, to Vermont was one of his early postings was on the USS Bennington. And I think a lot of really, big military buffs know that there was an aircraft carrier in World War II called the USS Bennington. But before that, there was a gunboat, and which was actually part of Dewey's fleet. But when Mayo was on it, that gunboat was a hydrographic services boat, meaning that it went out and it mapped the currents and the harbor bottoms so that the Navy could establish bases. This guy helped map Pearl Harbor to turn it into the U.S. naval base that we all know now, while he was on the USS Bennington. Went on to work in the lighthouse service, and he worked in the naval yards, and he even served in Mexico. So I think a lot of people forget, shortly before World War I, we had a little spat with Mexico, and there was some issues, the Tampico affair and Veracruz, and so he was very much involved with that, and he was actually in charge of the squadron out of Veracruz during our issues with Mexico in 1914. It was from that he got promoted to Vice Admiral and then ultimately Admiral of the Atlantic Fleet. So he was a big proponent of kind of convoy work and anti-submarine warfare. And by really thinking about how does the Navy counter submarines, he became a big advocate for airplanes. I think most people know the U.S. Navy wasn't too terribly involved in World War I because we came in kind of later in the war, right. But he saw what would be happening to navies between World War I and then ultimately World War II. And he had the foresight to actually say, I don't think battleships are the answer. I think we should stop building battleships. We need to build ships that can fight against submarines. And so he advocated for building cruisers and destroyers. And he said, why don't we investigate this idea of launching airplanes off of the decks of ships? And so this is before, really before you had aircraft carriers that we know now, but he was advocating for that at the time. So he really was a man ahead of his time. Yeah. He did retire in 1928, so he retired well before the development of the Navy that fought in World War II. But he certainly had a big impact on the development of what a modern Navy looks like.
At This Place in History.